Hey guys, this is Quadratics by factoring. So the only difference between this one and the last one is now we have a number in front here. So it's the same strategy. We're going to factor and then use the zero product property to solve. And again, the difference is this number in front. So we're going to be using the factoring strategies that we learned when we have a number in front here. So the first thing we're going to do, is we're going to find two things that multiply to 2 times 98. That's our AC, remember? A, B, C. So we need things that multiply to 2 times 98, which 2 times 98 is 196. So we need two things that multiply to 196 and add to negative 28. Remember to put your signs so that you make sure you have your correct positives and negatives. We want two things to multiply to a positive number and add to a negative number, so both of our factors are going to have to be negative. Both of our factors are going to have to be negative, and so let's start listing factors. So it could be 1 and 196, or negative 1, negative 196, but that's clearly too big. So let's go a little bit bigger on our numbers. Let's try dividing by 4. Okay, so 4 and 49 work, or negative 4 and negative 49 work. Still too big, right? If I add those together, I'm going to get a smaller number here, negative 53. So we need to try dividing by a bigger number. So let's see if 196 is divisible by 6. It's not. Let's try 7. Okay, so that would be negative 7 and negative 28. So we're looking for negative 28. So clearly these don't equal to negative 28, but we're getting closer. We're definitely getting closer. So let's try 8. Nope. 9. No. 10. No. 11. No. 12. No. 13. No. 14. Yes, 196 is divisible by 14. It's actually 14 times 14. So negative 14 would be our factors, and those do in fact add to negative 28. So this is what we're looking for. Negative 14 and negative 14. So to start factoring, we can do 2x squared minus 14x minus 14x. Remember, we're just splitting up that middle term based on the numbers that we found. Plus 98 equals 0. And then we are going to factor by grouping. So we're just going to figure out what can we factor out of the first two. Well, that would be a 2 and an x. I can factor out a 2x. So what do I have left? X minus 7, right? 14 divided by 2 is 7. And then here we can factor out, let's see. I want my parentheses over here when I get one to match this one. So I'm going to see what 98 divided by 7 is. It's 14. So I can factor out a 14 because 98 is 14 times 7. And I have 14 here. So I can factor out, in fact, I'm going to factor out a negative 14. Negative 14. Because I'm always going to, this sign is always going to be the same as the sign here because I want to start this with a positive number. So this is going to be x because that's all that's left there. And then 98 divided by negative 14 is negative 7 equals 0. So this matches this, which is what I want. So now I can write 2x, x minus 7. Nope, I'm just rewriting what I have written there. Oops. Okay, x minus 7, 2x minus 14 equals 0. So now I can set each of these things equal to 0 and see what I get. Remember, that's the zero product property. I can take, if I have two things multiplied together equals 0, I can separate them and set them each equal to 0. So I add 7. So I get x equals 7. That's one answer. And then I'm going to add 14. 2x equals 14. Divide by 2. Get x equals 7. So I got the same number twice. So this is one of those rare cases where I only have one answer. It turns out I could rewrite this. I'm not going to explain exactly how I got this right now, just for the sake of time, but I could write this as 2x minus 7 squared equals 0. So remember, if you can write it like this, then that is the case where you only have one solution. If I have nothing added or subtracted out here when I write it this way. We'll talk more about this form next week, but yeah. So this, if I can write it squared like this is when I have only one solution. So that's the situation. Sorry, I accidentally paused it. I was trying to get the mouse back. So that would be 7. That would be my answer. Let's look at the next question. Another thing we can do is we can look before we even try to factor. We can look and see, do I have two? I don't know why I said 2. Do I have common factors in all of them that I could factor out? And we could have on the last one. I didn't, but we could have. It will work if you don't, as you could see from the last one. But it will simplify your numbers. It will make them smaller if you factor out anything you can factor out first. So I know that 6 goes into 12, but does 6 go into 210? Yes, it does. So I can factor out a 6. So 6. So all I have left here is x squared, right? Because I'm just dividing by 6. Negative 12 divided by 6 is negative 2. And then negative 210 divided by 6 is negative 35. So now, not only do I have smaller numbers, I actually have a situation where I have a coefficient of 1 here. So I can go back to that strategy. So I can just say, okay, what multiplies to negative 5 and adds to negative 2, not negative 5, negative 35. And adds to negative 2. And I can just ignore the 6 for now. I can just ignore the 6 for now and work on factoring this part. And I don't have to worry about there being a coefficient here because I factored it out. So what adds to negative 35, multiplies to negative 35 and adds to negative 2? Well, I'm looking for, they need to multiply to a negative, so one has to be positive and one has to be negative. They need to add to a negative, so the bigger one is going to be negative. So the smaller number is going to be positive and the bigger number is going to be negative. So what things multiply to 35? The first thing that comes to my mind is 7 and 5. And if I make the bigger one negative, if I added those together, negative 7 plus 5 is negative 2. So this is right. Okay. So since I don't have a number here, I can just write this in factored form. So the 6 comes along for the ride, and I have x minus 7, x plus 5 equals 0. Now, when I'm splitting this off and setting each of these equal to 0, I can ignore the 6 because it doesn't have a variable with it. So I could say, okay, I have 3 things multiplied together, so I could set it into 3 equations, but one of those equations would be 6 equals 0. That never happens. That's not possible. 6 doesn't equal 0. So I can just ignore the 6. If it were 6x, then that would be a third equation. 6x equals 0 would be something I can solve. 6 equals 0 is nonsense. So we ignore the 6, and we have x minus 7 equals 0, x plus 5 equals 0. So adding 7 to both sides, I get x equals 7. Subtracting 5 from both sides, I get x equals negative 5. And I would put those in. Negative 5 goes here, 7 goes here. One thing I want to talk about really quick, I don't think this is going to happen on this Khan Academy assignment, but it might happen on a later one. It's just kind of a follow-up to what I was just saying about 6x. So if I had, say, x squared plus 3x equals 0, if that was my quadratic. So it's got 2 terms. One of them has an x squared and one of them has an x. I can factor out an x. We know that, right? I can factor out an x. So I have x plus 3. X times x plus 3 equals 0. So then I still have 2 equations because this has a variable in it. So I have x equals 0, and I have x plus 3 equals 0. So I would have x equals 0 would be one of my answers. So that can happen. So if you can factor out an x, then x equals 0 is going to be one of your answers. Even if it were 6x, right? 6x equals 0. I divide by 6. I still get x equals 0. So if I can factor out an x out of the whole thing, not just factor by grouping, but the whole thing, if I can factor an x out of the entire equation, then x equals 0 is going to be one of my solutions. All right, hopefully that helps. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you guys in the next video.